They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But sometimes, just sometimes, it's best served at 3 a.m. with the rhythmic clang of industrial tow trucks and a whole lot of expensive, illegally poured asphalt. Picture this. I'm Dean Caldwell, a guy who spent 25 years in commercial heavy construction in Chicago, grinding concrete and moving mountains of dirt just to earn the right to retire early to a quiet spot in the Texas Hill Country. My wife, Laura, she's a high school librarian, the kind of woman whose quiet strength could stop a hurricane, and our daughter, Chloe, was focused on college applications. We found our paradise, 3 acres on the edge of a wealthy subdivision called Oakwood Trails, and the house sat way back, connected to the main road by this beautiful, crunchy 400-yard gravel driveway. It sounded like breakfast cereal under the tires, and it kept the speed down, naturally. Now, here's the key detail, the one that saved my sanity and my retirement fund. I paid an extra $90,000 for that access road to be deeded separately. It was private property, carved out by the rancher before me specifically to avoid neighborhood politics. It was my fortress, my buffer zone, my little piece of heaven where no HOA could touch me. Enter Brenda Sterling. If you could somehow combine a pit viper's charm with a realtor's relentless ambition, you'd get Brenda. She drove a pristine white Mercedes G-Wagon with vanity plates that screamed, "Prop Queen." She'd been the HOA president of Oakwood Trails for 4 years, and in that time, she'd become a petty dictator, suing neighbors over everything from the shade of their stucco to having a third bird feeder. The woman carried a measuring tape in her purse, I'm not kidding, and used it to check the grass height. Her specialty was what I called aggressive assemblage. She wasn't just managing the neighborhood, she was secretly buying up surrounding parcels through shell corporations, using the HOA as her personal enforcement arm. My 3 acres, my quiet little corner, was the one keystone piece she needed to connect 3 big purchases into a mega estate development worth millions. My piece was standing directly in the way of her early retirement. The first shot was fired on a Tuesday morning in late May. I was drinking my coffee, enjoying the morning birdsong, when the rumble hit, the deep, earth-shaking rumble of heavy equipment. I looked out the kitchen window and my heart just dropped into my gut. There was a crew spreading hot black asphalt over my beautifully maintained gravel road. The smell of tar and diesel fumes was like a physical punch. I stormed outside, my boots already kicking up dust and confusion, and confronted the foreman. He just handed me a work order signed by Brenda. Oakwood Trails Community Access Beautification Project. My beautiful old fence posts were ripped out and tossed aside like garbage, and the metal surveyor markers I had professionally installed, sledgehammered into the ground, gone, and where my private road met the county road, they had installed twin decorative stone pillars with brass plaques. Welcome to Oakwood Trails, established 2024. She didn't just pave my road, she literally branded my property. I drove down to her little HOA office. I was shaking. Not with rage yet, but with this cold, terrifying violation. Brenda sat there behind her polished mahogany desk, framed by tacky real estate awards, radiating smug satisfaction. Her perfume smelled like expensive, unnecessary confidence. "Dean, darling," she purred, that smile sharp enough to cut glass. "We're finally bringing your access up to community standards. It was terribly rustic." She said rustic like it was a contagious disease. She showed me an enlarged plat map where my road was now highlighted in bright yellow, labeled Future Community Thoroughfare. She claimed the previous owner had verbally agreed to road sharing. No documentation, of course, just her word against a dead rancher's. The next day, the certified letter arrived, a $3,500 assessment for the improvement, plus a demand for $95 a month in maintenance fees and a 30-day notice to install appropriate community landscaping. The letter ended with a threat of liens and legal action. Laura came home, found the letter, and the sound of her slamming the pantry door was enough to tell me she was absolutely livid. But the worst part? Within a week, the neighborhood kids were using my new smooth asphalt as a high-speed skateboard path, their wheels grinding outside our bedroom window at 7 a.m. sharp. That's when the rage finally went from cold violation to white-hot purpose. What Brenda didn't know was that I wasn't just a retired construction guy. I was the guy who hired the lawyers, pulled the permits, and knew the municipal code better than the inspectors themselves. I was the guy who knew that you can't pour a cup of water, let alone a half-mile of asphalt, without a permit. My first call wasn't to a lawyer. It was to the county planning office. 2 days later, an unmistakable bright orange stop work order was fluttering on her fancy new stone pillar. That sight, dancing in the Texas wind, was better than winning the lottery. But Brenda, she didn't back down. That Friday, her board voted unanimously to fine me $600 a day for obstructing community progress and failure to maintain common area. She was fining me for not maintaining my own private property to her standards. The chutzpah was almost admirable. Then came the psychological war. She organized beautification walks, groups of 8 to 10 neighbors strolling past our house, holding their phones up like neighborhood paparazzi, whispering and taking pictures. Chloe started keeping her curtains closed during the day. "Dad," she said one afternoon, her voice small, "it feels like we live in a fishbowl." And she was right. While Brenda was playing neighborhood dictator, I was making calls. I brought in Rex Martinez, a retired sheriff's deputy who now specialized in private investigation, and Catherine Wentz, a property rights attorney from Dallas with a reputation for making opposing counsel weep openly during depositions. Rex, within a week, confirmed my suspicions. Brenda was bleeding money. Her shell corporations were deep in debt, owing over $360,000 to lenders, and her credit cards were maxed out at $75,000. My refusal to sell wasn't just a nuisance, it was threatening to collapse her entire house of cards before a massive quarterly loan payment came due. That's when it clicked. This wasn't about road access, this was about survival. Then, Rex found the smoking gun buried in a dusty courthouse basement filing cabinet that hadn't been opened since the Reagan administration. The original deed restrictions from 1982, filed by the cranky old rancher, were still attached. The language was beautiful. Access road shall remain private property in perpetuity, not subject to any homeowner association covenants, assessments, or interference whatsoever. Notarized, filed, cross-referenced. The rancher had done the legal equivalent of building a brick wall against busybodies. I was ready to build a statue to that cantankerous old cowboy. But Brenda's last act of desperation before the hammer fell was truly despicable. She went after Laura. Laura came home pale and shaking one afternoon. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint with the school board suggesting that her husband's hostile legal behavior might reflect poorly on her professional judgment as a librarian. "They made it sound like I'm a liability, Dean," she whispered, the stress overwhelming the gentle scent of her lavender shampoo. That's when I knew this wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was a targeted attack on my family's livelihood, and that, I decided, made it personal. I looked at Laura, holding her tight, feeling her trembling. "Honey," I said, pulling out my phone, taking a picture of the deed restrictions and the harassment letter, "when they go after your family, you stop playing defense. You don't negotiate. You destroy. And I know exactly how we're going to destroy her whole empire." I wasn't just going to win, I was going to make sure that everything Brenda Sterling stood for, that whole culture of petty, entitled HOA tyranny, crumbled down on her perfect little G-Wagon. We converted the garage into what Laura lovingly called the war room. Maps covered the walls, legal timelines stretched across folding tables, and Rex's evidence, 800 photos, 20 hours of video documenting harassment, illegal dumping, and midnight construction violations, was organized by Chloe, who turned out to have inherited her mother's genius for organization. My attorney, Catherine, she loved the evidence, especially the parts where Brenda's crew was caught on camera tearing down my surveyor markers at 2 a.m. Her strategy was simple and brutal. Simultaneous quiet title action to secure the deed and a federal environmental complaint filed the same day. Catherine explained, "We're going to shift the burden of proof from you defending your property to them defending themselves against federal criminal charges. By the time they realize what hit them, they'll be dealing with the FBI, not the HOA board." But the final piece of the puzzle, the coup de grace, came from an unlikely source. Marcus McKay, RKA Mac, the owner of a local towing and impound service. Mac had done all the HOA towing for Oakwood Trails for years, and it turned out Brenda had stiffed him on a $15,000 bill for unpaid services. Mac knew the HOA's liability policy was shaky, and unpaid contractor liens take priority over almost everything else. When I told him what Brenda had done, paving my private road, Mac's weathered face broke into a grin that would terrify a rattlesnake. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice low, "I know every flatbed driver and impound lot in this county. You tell me when, and those cars will vanish."
But Brenda's last act of desperation before the hammer fell was truly despicable. She went after Laura. Laura came home pale and shaking one afternoon. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint with the school board, suggesting that her husband's hostile legal behavior might reflect poorly on her professional judgment as a librarian. "They made it sound like I'm a liability, Dean," she whispered, the stress overwhelming the gentle scent of her lavender shampoo. That's when I knew this wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was a targeted attack on my family's livelihood, and that, I decided, made it personal. I looked at Laura, holding her tight, feeling her trembling. "Honey," I said, pulling out my phone, taking a picture of the deed restrictions and the harassment letter. "When they go after your family, you stop playing defense. You don't negotiate. You destroy. And I know exactly how we're going to destroy her whole empire." I wasn't going to just win. I was going to make sure that everything Brenda Sterling stood for, that whole culture of petty, entitled HOA tyranny, crumbled down on her perfect little G-Wagon. We converted the garage into what Laura lovingly called the war room. Maps covered the walls, legal timelines stretched across folding tables, and Rex's evidence, 800 photos, 20 hours of video footage documenting harassment, illegal dumping, and midnight construction violations, was organized by Chloe, who turned out to have inherited her mother's genius for organization. My attorney, Catherine, she loved the evidence, especially the parts where Brenda's crew was caught on camera tearing down my survey markers at 2 a.m. Her strategy was simple and brutal. Simultaneous quiet title action to secure the deed, and a federal environmental complaint filed the same day. Catherine explained, "We're going to shift the burden of proof from you defending your property to them defending themselves against federal criminal charges. By the time they realize what hit them, they'll be dealing with the FBI, not the HOA board." But the final piece of the puzzle, the coup de grace, came from an unlikely source. Marcus Mac Riley, the owner of a local towing and impound service. Mac had done all the HOA towing for Oakwood Trails for years, and it turned out Brenda had stiffed him on a $15,000 bill for unpaid services. Mac knew the HOA's liability policy was shaky, and unpaid contractor liens take priority over almost everything else. When I told him what Brenda had done, paving my private road, Mac's weathered face broke into a grin that would terrify a rattlesnake. "Mr. Caldwell," he said, his voice low, "I know every flatbed driver and impound lot in this county. You tell me when, and those cars will vanish." Brenda's final move was pure, unadulterated theater. She organized what she called a Community Action Day, a grassroots beautification project. The Facebook event looked wholesome: barbecue, lemonade, families working together. What it really was a lynch mob armed with bolt cutters, sledgehammers, and enough righteous indignation to level a small building. Their target? Every security camera, every survey marker, and every private property sign on my land. I had been waiting for this. I sent Laura and Chloe to Austin, no need for them to witness the ugliness. I was standing on my property line Saturday morning when the truck started arriving, lumbering up the illegally paved asphalt.
The air filled with the metallic clank of tools and the nervous energy of about 20 people wearing matching t-shirts that read Oakwood Pride. Brenda stepped out of her G-Wagon, clipboard in hand, looking like a general inspecting troops. She even had bolt cutters dangling from a belt. "Morning, neighbors," she called out, her voice dripping with practiced real estate enthusiasm. "Ready to bring this corner up to proper standards?" The crowd cheered, ready to commit felony vandalism. That's when I walked out, not with a weapon, but with my video camera, and standing beside me was Deputy Sam Rodriguez, a no-nonsense veteran who had been quietly documenting Brenda's escalating madness for 2 weeks. "Folks need to step back from the property line," Rodriguez announced calmly, his hand resting casually on his radio. "This is private land, and you are currently trespassing." Brenda lost it. I mean, truly lost it. She clutched her bolt cutters like a war trophy and started screaming about the harassment of tax-paying citizens, pointing at me like I was a criminal mastermind. "This man is destroying our community," she shrieked, actually accusing the deputy of being in my pocket. She stepped onto my land, brandishing the bolt cutters, and that was the line. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed across the sudden silence as Deputy Sam Rodriguez arrested Brenda Sterling right there on my illegally paved road. And here's the perfect twist. Brenda had called a local news crew hoping for a sympathetic story about a community leader blocked by a selfish neighbor. Instead, they filmed her, the HOA president, getting cuffed while ranting about property values and clutching a pair of bolt cutters. Her footage of her and 2 of her T-shirt-clad demolition crew being led away became the lead story on the evening news. While Brenda spent 72 uncomfortable hours in the county jail, the financial collapse began. Banks froze her shell corporation accounts. The HOA's insurance policy was voided due to criminal activity exclusion, leaving the board members personally liable. The federal investigation, based on the EPA violations, kicked into high gear. The final, satisfying flourish? I had Mac and his towing fleet waiting. The day after Brenda's mugshot made the papers, Mac's crew, with legitimate contractor liens, towed every single car belonging to the HOA board members and the most aggressive Oakwood Pride volunteers who had participated in the harassment. They didn't just tow them, they vanished them to impound lots scattered across 3 different counties, requiring cash and proof of clear title to retrieve. It was a beautiful, coordinated traffic ballet of pure bureaucratic revenge. A year later, the federal sentencing hearing was packed. Brenda, facing RICO and fraud charges based on our meticulous evidence, tried to give a rambling speech about property values. Judge Patricia Hayes cut her off. "Mrs. Sterling, this case represents everything wrong with unchecked authority and systematic neighbor harassment. Mr. Caldwell's patience and documentation saved this community from years more abuse." The judge announced an 8-year federal sentence. The courtroom erupted in applause. The victory was more than legal. The civil lawsuit awarded me $500,000 in damages, and I used $250,000 of that money to establish the Riverbend Veterans Scholarship, a fund providing college assistance for military families in the community. Laura, Mac, and my neighbor, Dr. Elena Vargas, who stood by us, are on the board. The wetlands, illegally damaged by Brenda's crew, were restored with the $2.5 million funded by her criminal forfeiture, becoming a beautiful wildlife corridor. My gravel road? It was never paved again. It became a low-impact nature trail connecting the subdivision to the new preserve. Families now walk that path, learning about environmental protection and property rights from educational signs funded by Brenda's ill-gotten gains. The irony is delicious. We still live here. The peace returned, replaced by the sound of protected songbirds and the gentle crunch of gravel under our tires. We stood up to the bully, and we won. But it wasn't just my victory. It was a victory for every person who ever had their life controlled by a petty tyrant. So, here's my question for you. What do you think is the line? When a community leader, an HOA president, tries to destroy your livelihood and terrorize your family, do you self-defense, or is there a point where fighting back makes you just as bad as them? Drop a comment below. I want to know your worst HOA nightmare and where you draw the line for justice. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of neighborhood justice and sweet, sweet comeuppance.